I always thought growing old meant finally being surrounded by peace. A cup of coffee in the morning, a small balcony garden, maybe a few visits from my daughter on weekends. But peace has a funny way of disappearing when people around you start thinking they know what's best for you. It started on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was polishing my wife's old teacup, the one with the little blue flowers along the rim. I still talk to her sometimes. "Martha," I said quietly, "I think Clara's coming over today. She's been distant lately. I hope everything's all right." An hour later, the doorbell rang. My daughter stood there, looking nervous. She used to hug me tightly, but now her arms hung stiff by her sides. Behind her stood Eric, her husband, the kind of man who always wore too much cologne and smiled only when he wanted something. "Dad," Clara began, stepping into the apartment. "We need to talk." Those words, "we need to talk." They've ruined more lives than wars, I think. Eric sat down without asking, scanning the room like a buyer inspecting a house. His eyes lingered on the framed pictures, my wedding day, Clara as a baby, the family vacations we took before Martha passed away. He looked at those memories as if they were clutter. I poured coffee for them anyway, the way Martha would have wanted. "So," I said with a small smile, "what's this about?" Clara hesitated. "Dad, you know we love you. But you're 70 now. You live alone. It's not safe anymore." Eric leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We've been thinking," he said, "that maybe it's time you moved somewhere more comfortable." "Comfortable?" I asked. "You mean a retirement home?" He nodded, smiling as if it were a generous offer. "Exactly. You'd have people to talk to. Activities. Meals cooked for you. No worries about bills or repairs." I stared at him, then at my daughter. She couldn't even look me in the eye. "And what about my apartment?" I asked quietly. Clara's voice trembled. "Eric and we could move in. It's closer to his office, and we could take care of the place. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I laughed softly, though it wasn't from humor. "So I go to a retirement home, and you two get my apartment. Sounds like a fair trade, doesn't it?" "Dad, please," she said, her tone defensive now. "You make it sound like we're stealing from you." Eric shrugged. "It's just practical. You can't live here forever." I wanted to say 1,000 things about how I built this home brick by brick after long factory shifts, how every corner had Martha's touch, how I'd promised her I'd never leave. But instead, I just looked down at my coffee. It was getting cold. "Give me a few days," I said. "I'll think about it." Eric smirked. "Of course, take your time. But the retirement community has limited spots." When they left, the silence felt heavier than usual. I walked to the balcony, looking over the street below. Kids were laughing, someone was playing a radio in the distance, and life went on, just not mine. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat by the window, staring at the city lights. Martha's picture sat on the table beside me. "Looks like our girl's forgotten what this home means," I whispered. But I haven't. The next day, Clara called twice. I didn't answer. Then Eric sent me a text with a link to the retirement home's website. Glossy photos of smiling seniors playing cards, drinking tea, pretending they didn't miss their real lives. I turned off the phone. By the third day, they came back, this time with papers. "Just sign these, Dad," Clara said softly. "It'll make everything easier." I took the papers and read them carefully. Transfer of property, power of attorney, all neatly printed, with little sticky notes where my signature should go. I looked up at them, forcing a smile. "You've thought of everything." Eric grinned. "We just want what's best for you." "Yes," I said quietly. "I can see that." They didn't notice my hands trembling, not from fear, but from something else, something sharper. Because in that moment, I realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought I was weak, lonely, ready to give up. But I'd built this life once, and I still knew how to build again, or tear things down, if needed. I placed the papers neatly on the table, patted them twice, and said, "Give me 3 days." Eric frowned. "Why 3 days?" "Because," I said with a faint smile, "I want to leave things properly." He didn't ask what I meant. He probably thought I was too old to matter. But in 3 days, they'd understand that old age doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's just the calm before the storm. The morning after they left with their little stack of papers, I woke before sunrise. The apartment was still, painted in pale orange light. Dust floated in the air like memories refusing to settle. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for my coffee right away. I just stood by the window, watching people rush to work, and wondered how many of them knew what betrayal from your own child felt like. I turned to Martha's photo on the shelf. 3 days, my love, I whispered. That's all I asked them for. And I'll use every hour wisely. There's something strange that happens when you hit a breaking point. Suddenly, clarity becomes your closest friend. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just calm. The kind of calm that makes people nervous because they can't tell what you're thinking. I sat down at the table and pulled out an old leather folder. Inside were property deeds, utility bills, and a small notebook filled with Martha's handwriting. She had been careful about everything, budgeting, neighbors' birthdays, even who owed us a favor. That notebook became my first weapon. On the second page, I found a number I hadn't dialed in years, Artie Klein. We'd worked together in construction back in the day. Artie was a clever man, the kind who could rebuild a wall faster than most people could ruin one. More importantly, after retiring, he started a small real estate business helping older folks manage their properties. I called him. Harold? Holy hell, I thought you were long gone. He laughed. His voice was rough but warm. Not yet, I said. But my daughter and her husband seem eager to speed up the process. After a pause, he muttered, that kind of trouble. I need to make a few changes to my property documents. I continued. Quietly. Can you help me do it fast? Fast I can do. Quiet. That's my specialty. Meet me at my office this afternoon. I hung up and exhaled. The plan was forming, piece by piece, like laying bricks for one last foundation. Before leaving, I took a slow walk through the apartment. My hand brushed the edge of the dining table, the one Martha saved for months to buy. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her vanilla candles. Every corner whispered memories. They thought this place was just real estate, but to me, it was sacred ground. That afternoon, I took the bus downtown. The young people around me scrolled on their phones, oblivious. Nobody noticed the old man in the brown coat gripping a folder like it was a weapon. Artie's office was small but tidy. He looked older too, gray beard, same mischievous spark in his eyes. So tell me, Harold, he said, leaning back in his chair. What exactly are we doing? I told him everything. About Clara, about Eric, about the papers. He listened quietly, then whistled low. Hell of a situation, he said. They think they're smart. But you still own that apartment outright, right? Fully paid off. Martha and I finished the mortgage 15 years ago. Then it's simple. You can transfer ownership, not to them, but somewhere safe. Trust, charity, whatever you want. I smiled. I was thinking something like that. I'll make sure they can't touch it, not even with all their clever words. We worked for hours. By the time I left, everything was in motion. Legally, the apartment would soon belong to a small educational fund named after my late wife, the Martha Greene Foundation. I'd still live there, but it wouldn't be mine to give away anymore. That meant Clara and Eric's plan was already doomed, and they didn't even know it. That evening, Clara called again. I answered this time. Dad, did you think about it? She asked, trying to sound gentle. I did, I said. You were right. Maybe it's time for a change. Oh, Dad, that's wonderful, she said, relief flooding her voice. Eric can start sorting things out tomorrow. Not tomorrow, I interrupted softly. In 2 days. I just need a little more time to say goodbye properly. She paused. Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. I hung up, then sat in silence. Her voice had sounded so cheerful. Maybe she truly believed she was doing the right thing. Or maybe she just wanted my home keys faster. Either way, I let her think she was winning. That night, I invited my neighbor, Mrs. Perez, for tea. She was a widow too, kind woman, always leaving cookies by my door. When she came over, I told her, if anything happens, if you see strangers trying to move things out of this apartment, call the police. I'm serious. She looked startled. Mr. Greene, are you in trouble? Nothing I can't handle, I said with a smile. Just watch for me, will you? She nodded. Always. Before bed, I opened the window. The city hummed softly below. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Quiet, steady control. They thought 3 days would be enough to break me. But 3 days was all I needed to remind them what I was made of. On the morning of the third day, the air felt unusually still. Even the pigeons on the balcony rail sat quietly, as if waiting for something to happen. I woke early, shaved, and put on my best gray shirt, the one Martha used to iron for Sunday dinners. If they were going to rob me of my dignity, I'd at least look the part of a man worth stealing from. At exactly 11, I heard the knock. Clara's voice came first. Dad? It's us. Us. Always us. Never me. My daughter had stopped being her own person the day she married Eric. They entered, bringing with them the sharp scent of Eric's cologne and the fake warmth of someone pretending to care. He carried a leather folder, the same one that had haunted my dreams all week. Morning, Dad, he said cheerfully, as if this were just another visit. You ready to make things official? I smiled faintly. More than ready. We sat at the dining table. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, cutting across the papers he laid out like a spotlight on their greed. I could feel Martha's presence beside me, quiet, watchful, approving. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. Dad, I know this isn't easy, but the home we found for you is beautiful. You'll have your own room, a garden. Clara, I interrupted softly. Let's not pretend. You want me to sign the apartment over. Let's just do what you came for. Her eyes filled with guilt. Eric cleared his throat. It's for the best, he said. You'll see. He handed me a pen. Expensive. Gold-tipped. I turned it in my fingers slowly. I always thought you'd want to inherit this place after I'm gone, I said quietly. Not before. Eric's smile twitched. We're just planning ahead. I nodded. Planning ahead? Yes, that's wise. They watched as I leaned forward and placed my signature where the little yellow notes told me to. I signed every page slowly, carefully, my handwriting steady. When I finished, Eric reached eagerly for the papers. Thank you, Harold. You're making the right choice. I looked him dead in the eyes. I hope you're sure of that. He didn't notice the hint of irony in my tone. He gathered the documents, slipped them into his folder, and stood up as if the victory were complete. Clara hugged me then, hesitant, fragile. I'll visit you every week, I promise, she whispered. I know you will, I said. Because you'll need to. She frowned, not understanding. I simply smiled. After they left, I sat there for a long while, staring at the empty chairs. The room still smelled of their perfume, but underneath, I could smell dust and paper and endings. Then, slowly, I began to laugh. Quietly at first, then deeper, not from joy, but from relief. Because the signatures they carried in that folder weren't what they thought they were. Artie had handled everything with surgical precision. The documents they brought were real enough, but before they arrived, I had prepared another set. Identical on the surface, but legally meaningless. I'd made sure the copies they gave me to sign weren't the ones that mattered. The real deeds were already locked in Artie's safe, under the Martha Greene Foundation name. My home was untouchable. That evening, Clara called again. Dad, everything's official. The director of the retirement home will call you tomorrow to schedule your move. Wonderful, I said cheerfully. I'll pack my things tonight. Her voice softened. You're not angry with us, are you? Of course not, sweetheart. I understand now. Understand what? That sometimes people only realize what something means to them after it's gone. She didn't reply, just a quiet breath, and then the call ended. I spent the next few hours packing, not my clothes, but small keepsakes, Martha's photo, my Navy badge, a few old letters. I placed them neatly in a wooden box. It wasn't about leaving. It was about reminding myself what truly mattered. Then I called Artie. You sure about this? He asked. Completely, I said. By tomorrow morning, they'll try to register the transfer, and the clerk will tell them the property isn't in my name anymore. Artie chuckled. Oh, that's going to be a sight. Oh, I'll be there, I said. I wouldn't miss it. Before going to bed, I stood by the window again. The city lights blinked like tiny signals from another life. I wasn't bitter, not anymore. I was simply awake. I finally saw my daughter for who she'd become, and her husband for what he always was, a man who mistook kindness for weakness. I thought about Martha, about how she'd smile and shake her head if she could see me now. Still stubborn, Harold, she'd say. Always, I'd whisper back. The next morning, I put on my coat and waited. I knew they'd call soon, either triumphant or panicking. And when they did, my part in this quiet revenge would be complete. But something deep inside me told me this story wasn't just about losing an apartment. It was about losing, and maybe reclaiming, a family. As I stepped out into the crisp air, I could feel the weight lift from my chest. 3 days had passed, and in those 3 days, I had turned from a man being thrown away into a man they'd never forget. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. I hadn't even finished my toast before I saw Clara's name flashing on the screen. I took a sip of coffee, then answered, pretending to sound half asleep. "Dad, we're at the office," she said breathlessly. "They can't find the property documents. The lady here says the apartment's registered under something called the Martha Greene Foundation." "What is that?" I smiled slowly. "Ah, yes, that would be my wife's name." "Dad," she said, her voice trembling now, "what did you do?" "I protected what mattered," I replied calmly. "Something you should have done before listening to your husband." In the background, I could hear Eric's voice, raised, sharp, angry. "Ask him how he did it. He can't legally." "Oh, he can," I interrupted, my tone cool as ice. "And he did." I hung up before she could answer. Then I put on my coat, tucked Martha's photo into my pocket, and headed out. The bus ride felt lighter that morning. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one chasing explanations. I was the one holding them. When I arrived at the registry office, I saw them from across the lobby. Clara pacing nervously, Eric arguing with the clerk, waving his arms like a spoiled child denied a toy. The clerk, a young woman with glasses, looked exhausted. "Sir," she was saying, "the apartment is not owned by a private individual anymore. It belongs to the Martha Greene Foundation. You can't transfer or sell what you don't own." Eric turned when he saw me, his face red with frustration. "What kind of trick is this?" he snapped. "No trick," I said, walking up to the counter. "Just good paperwork." Clara stepped forward, her eyes wet. "Dad, why? Why would you do this to me?" "To you?" I repeated softly. "You tried to take my home, Clara. The one your mother and I built together. You wanted to throw me into a place where people go to wait for time to finish them off, so you could move your furniture into my living room." "It wasn't like that," she whispered, though her voice broke halfway through. Eric said a lot of things," I interrupted. "And you believed him, because it was easier than believing that your father still mattered." Eric glared. "You're being dramatic, old man. We were just trying to help." "Help?" I smiled faintly. "By stealing what's mine? You don't even need that apartment," he hissed. "You're just a lonely old man who can't let go of the past." I looked at him for a long time, then leaned in close enough for only him to hear. "Maybe. But you should remember, Eric, the past built everything you have now. And if you disrespect it long enough, it has a way of coming back." His jaw tightened. Clara looked down, her hands trembling. The clerk cleared her throat gently. "Sir, do you still wish to proceed with the transfer request?" she asked Eric. He didn't answer, just turned, muttered something under his breath, and stormed toward the exit. Clara stayed behind, tears streaking down her face. "Dad, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know he'd." "Yes, you did," I said softly. "But you pretended not to, because pretending is easier than admitting you hurt someone who loved you." She started to speak, but her voice failed her. I placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, but not unkind. "Clara, you're still my daughter. You always will be. But trust doesn't rebuild itself overnight." Her lips quivered. "Can I still visit?" "When you come alone," I said gently. "You know where the spare key is." For a moment, I thought she might hug me, but she didn't. She just nodded, wiped her eyes, and left quietly. I stood there for a while, letting the silence wrap around me. The clerk gave me a small, respectful smile. "You handled that better than most would," she said. I chuckled. I've lived long enough to know shouting doesn't make people listen. Silence does. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery Martha used to love, bought a loaf of her favorite rye bread. The owner, Mrs. Delgado, smiled. "Haven't seen you in a while, Harold." "Been busy teaching some lessons," I said. She laughed, not understanding, and handed me the warm loaf. When I returned home, the apartment felt different, lighter, almost breathing again. For the first time in months, I opened every window wide and let the sunlight in. Dust floated through the air like tiny ghosts being set free. I placed the bread on the counter, made tea, and sat down by the window. Across the street, I saw Eric pacing outside, phone to his ear, furious. Clara stood beside him, small and silent. He barked at her, then walked off, leaving her alone on the sidewalk. She looked up at my window once, eyes full of something, shame, regret, maybe both. I raised my cup slightly, like a quiet toast. She didn't wave back, but she didn't look away either. That night, as I locked the door, I whispered toward Martha's photo, You'd be proud, my love. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just protected what we built. And for the first time in years, I slept deeply. No anger, no bitterness. Just peace. But peace never stays forever. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. No name, no return address, just one sentence written in a familiar hand. You'll regret embarrassing me, old man. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it beside my coffee cup. The storm, it seemed, wasn't over yet. The letter sat on my table for hours. I didn't touch it again, but it was there, like a shadow that refused to leave. Every time I glanced at it, the words burned back into my mind. You'll regret embarrassing me, old man. By evening, I began to understand what that meant. It started small. The building's superintendent, George, knocked on my door around 6. Mr. Greene, I'm real sorry to bother you, he said, scratching the back of his neck. But your daughter's husband called earlier. Said you were moving out, asked me to let movers in tomorrow. My jaw tightened. Did he now? Yeah, but I figured I'd check with you first. I know you ain't mentioned nothing about moving. I took a deep breath. Thank you, George. Don't let anyone in. Not without my say-so. He nodded firmly. You got it. I'll keep an eye out. When he left, I locked the door, double-checked the bolts, and turned off the lights. My reflection in the window looked older that night. Not tired, just carved with the lines of someone who's had to relearn how to trust. By the next morning, the war had begun. I went downstairs to find a for sale sign stuck in the front lawn, my address printed neatly below. Eric's doing, of course. I tore it out of the ground and tossed it into the trash. He wasn't trying to sell anything. He was trying to humiliate me, to make the neighbors whisper. But I'd been whispered about before. I'd survived worse. When I came back inside, I found Clara waiting by the door. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept. Dad, please, she said softly. He's angry. You humiliated him in front of everyone at the office. He's saying things, bad things. About me? I asked. She nodded. He told people you forged documents, that you're losing your mind. He even went to the retirement home to tell them you'd changed your mind and would be moving in this week. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. Your husband doesn't understand one thing, Clara. When a man has nothing left to lose, he stops playing by other people's rules. Dad, please, she whispered again, tears slipping down her cheeks. Can't we just end this? I looked at her, really looked. My daughter, standing in the same hallway where she'd taken her first steps, now pleading for peace between her father and the man who wanted to destroy him. I felt both anger and pity. Clara, I said quietly, the only way this ends is when he stops seeing me as weak. Until then, I'm just another wall for him to break. She pressed her lips together and left without another word. That night, I got another call, this time from an unknown number. When I answered, all I heard was Eric's voice, calm but dripping with venom. You think you're clever, Harold, he said. But everyone's laughing at you now. You'll die alone in that dusty apartment, surrounded by memories no one wants. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, you sound scared, Eric. You should be. He laughed mockingly. Of what? You? Of the truth, I said. Because the thing about men like you, the louder you talk, the less you sleep at night. He hung up. The next morning, I went for a walk. My knees ached, but my steps were steady. I stopped by the local community center, the one Martha used to volunteer at. They still remembered her there, still kept her old photo on the wall. The director, a kind woman named Denise, greeted me warmly. Mr. Greene, we were just talking about expanding the Foundation's reading program. Did you come to discuss it? Her words caught me off guard. The Foundation, the one that now owned my apartment. Martha's name was already being used to fund something good. Books for children, small scholarships, food for seniors. My home was doing more than sheltering me. It was sheltering others too. For the first time, I realized the full power of what I'd done. I hadn't just taken revenge. I'd built something that would outlive the bitterness. When I returned home, a police car was parked outside. My stomach sank for a moment, until I saw George standing beside it, arms crossed. Caught him, he said, pointing toward the alley. Your son-in-law tried to sneak in through the back door. Said he was checking on you. But he had a key in his hand, not yours. The officer came over. Mr. Greene, do you want to press charges? I looked past them, toward Eric, standing in the alley, red-faced and defiant. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "No, let him go. I don't need the law to teach him a lesson." The officer hesitated but nodded. When they released him, Eric brushed past me, muttering, "You're pathetic." I leaned closer. "And you're finished." He didn't look back. Just walked off, his pride dragging behind him like a torn flag. That evening, Clara came again, alone this time. She sat at the table where it had all started, her hands folded, voice barely above a whisper. "I left him, Dad." I didn't react right away. I poured her tea, then sat across from her. "You don't have to explain," I said. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I thought he was helping us, helping you. But all he wanted was control. When I saw what he did today, I realized I've been blind." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry." For a long while, we sat there in silence, holding hands like strangers learning each other again. Then she said, "What happens now?" I looked around the apartment, at the photos, the teacups, the life Martha and I had built. "Now," I said softly, "we start fixing what's left." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. But for the first time, I didn't fear the storm. It had already come and gone, and I was still standing. A week passed after that night. The air outside had changed, softer, quieter, like the city itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. My days started simply again. Coffee on the balcony, the hum of life below, the feeling of belonging returning to a place that had almost been stolen. Clara came by every few days. No Eric anymore. Just her, holding a bag of groceries or a tin of cookies she'd baked herself. The first time, she didn't say much. She just cleaned the kitchen, humming one of Martha's old songs, eyes red but peaceful. I let her. Words weren't needed yet. On the third visit, she finally spoke. "Dad," she said, sitting beside me at the table, "I keep thinking about how it all started. How I let him convince me you were helpless. I don't even know how I could believe it." I looked at her hands, trembling slightly as she twisted her wedding ring. "Because you wanted peace," I said quietly. "You thought agreeing would bring it. But peace built on guilt never lasts." She nodded slowly. "I left him for good. I filed the papers yesterday." I sighed, not out of relief, not out of anger. Just a long, deep sigh of understanding. "That's a hard road," I said, "but the right one." Then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached into her bag and placed an envelope in front of me. "I talked to the board of the Martha Greene Foundation," she said. "They told me what you did, how the apartment funds programs for seniors and kids. They asked if I'd like to help organize it." Her eyes met mine, searching for permission. I smiled. "That's exactly what your mother would have wanted. Something good coming from something broken." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I want to fix what I broke too," she whispered. "Starting here." For a while, we just sat together, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the window. The same window where I had once watched her play in the yard. The same one I'd almost lost to greed. Now, through it, I saw something new: forgiveness. A few days later, I got a call from Artie. "Harold, you'll like this," he said, his tone cheerful. "Remember the foundation registration? Local news picked it up. They're doing a piece on you, calling you the old man who outsmarted the system." I chuckled. "Tell them to call me Harold. The system's not what I fought. It was blindness." Artie laughed. "Whatever you say, hero." After I hung up, I walked around the apartment, touching the furniture, the walls, the picture frames. Each one felt alive again. Not just memory, meaning. Every mark on the wood, every scratch on the door was a story no one could ever rewrite. That evening, I sat down to write a letter. Not to Eric, not to anyone living. To Martha. "My dear Martha, I did what you'd have done. I didn't shout. I didn't hate. I just held on to what mattered until the noise quieted. Clara came back. She's helping with your foundation. You'd be proud of her. I am too. Your home is safe. Your name lives on. And maybe, just maybe, I can rest now. Love always. Harold." I placed the letter beside her photograph and lit a small candle. The flame flickered gently, reflecting in the glass, almost like she was nodding. Later that night, there was a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, George stood there with a small brown envelope. "Found this in the mailbox, Mr. Greene. Thought it might be important." I thanked him and took it inside. No return address again. My heart tensed for a second, thinking of Eric. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside was a single key and a folded note. "You were right. I lost more than I ever owned. Take care of Clara. Eric. I stared at the key. It wasn't mine. It was his, their old apartment key, the one he once said he'd never give up. Maybe it was his way of saying goodbye. Or surrender. Either way, it was enough. I set it on the shelf beside Martha's candle and smiled faintly. Not all endings need applause. Some just need silence. In the days that followed, Clara and I began rebuilding small things. We repainted the living room. She started volunteering at the foundation office. I even went with her once. Watched her help an elderly couple fill out forms for heating support. She looked confident, kind, almost like her mother again. When we returned home that evening, she said, "I never understood how much this place meant to you, Dad." I looked around and said, "It's not just walls and furniture, Clara. It's proof that love leaves fingerprints, and so does betrayal. But forgiveness, that's the mark that lasts the longest." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tightly, the way she used to when she was little. That night, I sat by the open window, the candle still flickering beside Martha's photo. The city outside was calm, soft, alive. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I just felt complete. I closed my eyes and whispered, 3 days, Martha. That's all it took. Autumn came early that year. The leaves outside my window had already turned to gold, and the air smelled faintly of rain and memory. Every morning, I'd sit on the balcony with my coffee and listen to the city breathing below, alive, unpredictable, the same way life had become again. Clara started visiting more often. Sometimes she'd bring pastries, sometimes new plans for the Martha Greene Foundation. She was different now, slower to speak, quicker to listen. There was a quiet guilt in her, yes, but also a softness I hadn't seen since she was a child. One afternoon, she came holding a notebook full of notes and sketches. "We're expanding the reading program," she said excitedly. "We want to open a small community library, one that carries Mom's name. The city even offered a grant if we can secure a space." I looked through her pages, drawings of shelves, reading corners, the smiling faces of children. It was all there. Purpose, rebirth, healing. "You've done more in a few months than most people do in a lifetime," I said. She smiled shyly. "I just want to make things right." "You already are," I said quietly. "You're giving something back that no one can take, kindness." That evening, we ate together at the old dining table. For the first time in years, there was laughter again. Clara told stories about her childhood, about the nights she and Martha baked cookies and fought over who got to lick the spoon. I listened, smiling, my heart full and heavy at the same time. When she left that night, I stood at the door, watching her walk down the street. The wind carried her laughter with it. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that sound. But peace, I've learned, is never permanent. It's borrowed, and you have to keep earning it. A few days later, a letter arrived. No threats this time, just an official-looking envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside was a notice, Eric Patterson versus the Martha Greene Foundation, Property Dispute Hearing, November 12th. So, he wasn't done after all. I sat down slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. Eric was challenging the transfer, claiming it had been done under undue influence and mental impairment. In simpler words, he was calling me senile. That evening, I called Artie. He answered on the first ring. "I figured this might happen," he said. "Men like him never walk away quietly." "What are my chances?" I asked. "Legally, perfect. The papers are airtight. But emotionally," he sighed. "It's going to hurt, Harold. He'll try to humiliate you in court." "I've been humiliated before," I said dryly. "Doesn't sting as much the second time." When Clara found out, she was furious. "He's out of his mind," she said, slamming the notice onto the table. "He's just trying to drag you down with him." I put my hand over hers. "Let him try? You can't drown a man who already learned how to swim in storms." She looked at me, tears of both pride and sadness in her eyes. "You've changed, Dad." "Maybe," I said with a faint smile. "Or maybe I just stopped pretending I'm too old to fight." The days leading up to the hearing were heavy with tension. Reporters had caught wind of the story. "Elderly man outsmarts greedy son-in-law," they called it. The headlines made me laugh, though they made Clara uncomfortable. "I don't want pity," I told her. "Just peace." On the morning of the hearing, I wore my old navy blue suit. It was a little tight around the shoulders, but it made me feel steady. In the courtroom, Eric sat across from me, perfectly groomed, his arrogance polished like a weapon. He didn't look at me once. His lawyer spoke first, long, loud, and full of empty words. Mr. Patterson only wants what's fair, he said. Mr. Greene was clearly manipulated into signing over his property under emotional distress following his wife's death. When it was my turn, the judge, a kind-eyed woman with streaks of silver in her hair, asked me to speak for myself. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. I'm not here because I was tricked. I'm here because I finally learned not to be. A hush fell over the room. I continued, that home was never about bricks or money. It was a promise between me and my late wife. My daughter forgot that for a while, but she found her way back. Mr. Patterson, however, never understood it to begin with. He thought he could take something sacred and turn it into profit. I didn't fight him with fists or anger. I fought him with honesty. Eric's lawyer started to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Continue, Mr. Greene. I nodded. I didn't move my home into a foundation to keep it from my family. I did it to make sure it always stayed one. Because a home that helps others never truly dies. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Eric looked away. The ruling came quickly. The foundation stood. Eric's claims were dismissed. His final attempt to destroy what he couldn't own, gone in less than 10 minutes. Outside the courthouse, Clara hugged me tightly, tears soaking my shoulder. You did it, Dad. No, I said, smiling faintly. We did. As we walked away, I glanced back once. Eric stood alone on the courthouse steps, staring after us, smaller than I'd ever seen him. He didn't shout, didn't move, just watched as we left. That night, I slept soundly. No letters, no ghosts, just the quiet sound of rain against the windows, and somewhere deep inside, the voice of Martha whispering, You did good, Harold. You did good. 2 months passed before I realized how different my life had become. The apartment that once felt like a cage of memories now felt alive again, with laughter, visitors, and the faint smell of fresh paint. Clara spent most days working at the foundation office, and every evening she'd stop by with news stories, small victories, or updates about the community library project. Dad, she said one night, spreading blueprints across the kitchen table. We finally got the permits approved. The Martha Greene Community Library is happening. They even gave us the old post office building on Jefferson Street. I looked at the plans, tall shelves, soft reading corners, murals of open books and sunlight. It felt unreal. Your mother would have been proud, I said softly. She always wanted to fill the world with books. Clara smiled. She still is. The weeks that followed were full of motion. Volunteers painted walls, kids helped carry boxes of donated books, and I, old as I was, found myself sanding wooden benches in the mornings and brewing coffee for everyone at noon. People called me Mr. Harold, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so needed. One afternoon, while the last touches were being added, a little boy approached me. Mr. Harold, is it true this library used to be your house? He asked, his eyes wide. I laughed. No, son. My house is still mine. But this place? This was built with love from that home. He thought for a moment. So it's like, your house had a baby? I couldn't help but smile. Exactly like that. Opening day arrived on a bright Sunday morning. The city officials came, cameras too, but it didn't feel formal. It felt warm. The ribbon was red, the crowd full of faces I knew. Neighbors, friends, volunteers, and even Mrs. Perez from across the hall. Clara gave a small speech, her voice trembling only once. This library, she said, is more than shelves and books. It's a promise, one my mother made, and my father kept. It's proof that love can outlast even our mistakes. Then she handed me the scissors. My hands shook slightly, but I cut the ribbon, and the applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for Martha, for the life we'd built, and for the second chances we'd earned. Inside, the children ran between the aisles, their laughter echoing against the freshly painted walls. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain, not sadness, just fullness. A life coming full circle. Later that evening, after the guests left, Clara and I stayed behind to clean up. The air smelled of paper and fresh paint. I walked through the aisles, fingers brushing along the spines of the books. When I reached the center table, I found a small bronze plaque. Clara must have placed it there while I wasn't looking. It read, "In memory of Martha Greene, for the woman who believed kindness could rebuild anything, and the man who proved her right. I swallowed hard, tracing the letters with my fingers. You shouldn't have, I whispered. Clara smiled. I had to. When we left, the street was quiet. The last orange rays of sunset painted the windows, and I felt a rare calmness settle over me. For the first time in years, I thought, maybe this really is the end of it. But the universe has a way of testing peace. A week later, Clara didn't show up for dinner. That wasn't like her. I waited, made tea, even kept her favorite pastry warm in the oven. Around 8, I finally called. No answer. By 9, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She came to me for closure. Don't worry, old man. I'm not the villain anymore. I just want to talk. It was signed, Eric. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my coat and left without even locking the door. The city streets blurred past as I walked fast, faster than I thought my legs could move. I didn't know where he lived anymore, but I knew where he liked to go when he wanted to feel in control. The pier. That same lonely spot by the water where he used to smoke cigars and complain about life being unfair. The wind was brutal that night. Cold, biting. And there they were, Clara standing near the railing, her coat whipping in the wind, and Eric a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He turned as he saw me, a thin smile crossing his face. Relax, Harold, he said. We're just talking. Clara's eyes widened when she saw me. Dad, it's okay. I just wanted to end things properly. By meeting him here? Alone? I snapped. My voice came out harsher than I intended. Eric raised his hands mockingly. You think I'm dangerous? I'm just a man who lost everything. I stepped closer. You lost it because you threw it away. He smirked. Maybe. But you know what's funny, Harold? You still think you won. The wind howled louder. Behind him, the water slapped against the pier. I could see his face clearly under the streetlight. Tired, hollow, but still defiant. I didn't win, I said quietly. I just survived. For a moment, no one spoke. The waves filled the silence between us, angry and relentless. Then, unexpectedly, Eric's shoulders dropped. You were right, he said. About everything. I thought taking what you had would make me feel powerful. But all it did was make me small. Clara moved closer to him cautiously. Eric. He shook his head. No, don't. You have your father. You have something real. I never did. And now I never will. He turned and walked away down the pier, disappearing into the mist before I could say another word. Clara clutched my arm, trembling. Do you think he'll come back? I looked at the empty pier, the dark water swallowing his silhouette. No, I said softly. Not this time. That night, as we drove home, neither of us spoke. But inside, I knew something had shifted. Forgiveness isn't a door that opens once. It's one you keep unlocking over and over until you learn to live without anger. And though I didn't know it yet, that meeting at the pier would be the last time any of us ever saw Eric Patterson. The police called 3 days after the night at the pier. A fisherman had found a wallet, Eric Patterson's, wedged between the rocks near the shoreline. No body, no sign of violence. Just his driver's license, a hotel card, and a small photo of Clara tucked inside. I sat in silence as the officer explained. Clara stood by the window, her hand pressed to the glass, watching rain slide down the pane. When he left, the apartment was quiet again, too quiet. He's gone, she whispered. Really gone. I didn't know what to say. Some things don't need words. They just sit between people like fog, heavy and unshakable. That night, I dreamed of the pier, the wind, the waves, his face disappearing into mist. When I woke, the candle beside Martha's photo had burned out, and the room smelled of cold wax and salt. Days turned into weeks. The news stopped talking about him. People moved on. But not Clara. She kept waiting for a call, a letter, a miracle. Sometimes I caught her standing at the door as if expecting him to walk up the stairs. Maybe he's alive, she'd say. Maybe, I'd answer. But deep down, I knew she wasn't waiting for him. She was waiting for peace. The foundation work kept her busy. She buried her grief in projects, book drives, donations, community events. People started calling her the heart of Martha's house. Every time I heard that name, it made me smile, and ache a little too. Winter came. The library was warm and bright, strings of lights hanging from the ceilings. Children built snowmen outside, while volunteers served cocoa. I sat by the window with my tea, watching them, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. One evening, As I was locking up, a postal worker handed me a package. No return address, just my name. Inside was a small wooden box and a note. Harold, I found this among Eric's things. He left it at the harbor office weeks ago. Thought you should have it. DC. Inside the box was a wristwatch, mine. The one I'd lost years ago after Martha's funeral. The one I thought had fallen somewhere between grief and forgetting. I turned it over. On the back, scratched in clumsy letters, were 3 words. Forgive me, Harold. I sat there for a long time, the weight of it in my hand. It was heavy not because of metal, but because of everything it carried. Anger, regret, love twisted into something broken. When I showed it to Clara, she covered her mouth. He kept it all this time. Yes, I said quietly. Maybe it was his way of giving something back. She cried for a while, then whispered, I hope he found peace. So do I said. That night, we lit 2 candles. One for Martha, one for Eric. Their flames danced together in the window, and for the first time, the apartment didn't feel like a place of loss. It felt like a place of forgiveness. Months passed. The library flourished. We added a small section for life stories, handwritten memoirs by locals, each bound in simple brown covers. Clara suggested I write one too. I laughed. What would I call it? She smiled. 3 days. That's how long it took you to change everything. I pretended to grumble, but that night, I sat at my desk and began to write. About the apartment, about Martha, about betrayal and redemption, about what it means to lose everything and still wake up grateful. As I wrote, I realized something. Revenge had brought me justice, but forgiveness, that brought me freedom. By spring, my story was on the library shelf, just another plain brown book among hundreds. I liked it that way. No special placement, no spotlight. Just words waiting for someone else who needed to believe that even old wounds can heal. Then, one morning, a boy from the library brought me a letter. Someone left this in your book, he said. Inside was a single sentence, written in familiar handwriting. Thank you for letting me go. No signature, no return address. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, then slipped it between the pages of 3 days. Some stories, I thought, never truly end. They just learn how to breathe differently. Spring slipped quietly into summer. The air outside smelled of cut grass and warm stone, and the world felt softer again. Every morning, I still brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for Martha, and carried them to the balcony. The second cup always cooled untouched, but it made the space feel less empty. Clara had grown into her new life. She'd moved into a small apartment near the library and spent her days running the foundation, helping seniors with their paperwork, teaching children how to read. When she spoke, people listened. When she smiled, it felt like sunlight finding its way into every corner that used to be dark. Sometimes, when she visited, she'd bring her old sketchbook, the one filled with ideas for the library. She'd sit at my table, flipping through the pages, and I'd watch her draw quietly while the clock ticked beside us. There was peace in that sound. The same clock that once measured my loneliness now measured something else. Time lived well. One afternoon, she looked up from her sketches. Dad, she said softly, do you ever think about those 3 days? Every day, I admitted. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I learned. She smiled. What did you learn? That sometimes the worst thing people do to us shows us the best we still have inside. She didn't answer. She just reached across the table and held my hand. No guilt, no apology, just love. Later that week, the library hosted a small celebration, 1 year since its opening. Children ran between the shelves, laughter bouncing off the walls. The mayor gave a short speech, but I wasn't listening. I was watching Clara standing beneath the bronze plaque with Martha's name on it, talking to a group of kids about kindness. Her voice carried across the room, clear and steady. And I realized, the story wasn't mine anymore. It was hers now. After the event, I stayed behind while everyone else left. The lights were dim, the building humming softly with the memory of voices. I walked to the back corner where 3 days sat on the shelf. Someone had slipped a small flower between its pages, fresh, white, alive. I smiled. Maybe the boy who'd found my letter had brought it. Or maybe it was someone who'd simply needed to read about survival, forgiveness, and the strength of quiet men. Outside, the sunset turned the street gold. I locked the doors, took one last look inside, and felt the familiar ache in my chest, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. just reminds you that you've loved deeply and lived fully. That night, back home, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. It took them 3 days to try and take everything from me. It took me 3 days to take myself back. And it took a lifetime to understand that the real revenge isn't making others pay. It's learning to live without bitterness. I closed the notebook, placed it beside Martha's picture, and turned off the light. The next morning, Clara knocked on the door early, her hands full of flowers and coffee. "Happy Father's Day," she said, grinning. "I brought your favorite." I laughed. "You remembered?" "I remember everything now," she said. "Even the things I tried to forget." We spent the day walking through the park, talking about nothing and everything. Birds sang above us, children laughed nearby, and I thought how strange it was to survive betrayal, loss, and anger, only to find yourself surrounded by peace again. As the sun began to set, Clara asked, "Dad, if you could change anything, would you?" I shook my head. "Not a thing, because every wrong turn still led me here." When I got home, the apartment was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not lonely. I lit a candle for Martha, just as I always did, and the flame danced gently against the window. Outside, the lights of the city shimmered like promises kept, and as I stood there, watching the night fall over everything I'd once feared to lose, I finally understood the truth. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. 3 days later, and for the rest of my life, I was free.